So the last video I posted got kind of deep. I spoke to my grandmother's death and its impact on me and my family, especially us being there when she died. So today I thought I'd, come with something a little bit lighter and talk about slavery. And real quick before I go any further, this is probably going to be on the long side, at least in terms of social media. So if you're looking for something quick and bite-sized, skedaddle, or ideally bookmark it and come back to it later. Don't skedaddle at all, but just want to give you the heads up. So this all started in terms of what I want to speak about. A few weeks ago, I was looking for something new to read. I do a lot of reading around the end of life for this project that I'm working on, just out of my own interest and for this project, whether it's books or online research and reading that I'm doing. But I was looking to mix it up a little bit, and read about something different in conjunction with all this death and dying stuff that I'm looking into. So, I was perusing my bookshelf, looking for something good to read, and came across the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. Now, I had read this back in high school or college. I don't remember precisely when, and had unfortunately forgotten a lot of the details. But it caught my eye for a few different reasons. Number one, it's the 400th anniversary of slavery in the U.S. The New York Times is working on a great project called 1619 that some of you may have seen. As a white person just living in the U.S., it's, I think, important for us to, know this history and understand it better. And also, I live in Harlem. And Frederick Douglass Boulevard is not too far away from the street I live on. So for all those reasons, it caught my eye and began reading it. So Frederick Douglass has an amazing story. He's half white, half black. He believes his father was his master, his slaveholder, on one of the plantations he was at when he was growing up, which I can't even get my mind around that. But he did not receive any special treatment for that fact. In fact, he probably received the worst treatment because of that. And his mother was also a slave on the plantation. So he escaped at some point and ended up coming up north and writing his autobiography and going on to great success after that. This book has been, a very important part of the history of slavery in this country. And the story itself is incredible. The detail that he goes into it's abhorrent what happened, and the brutality that he describes is it makes you sort of recoil in horror and disgust and just disbelief that this happened in our country or anywhere, to anyone. So I think his ability to put us in this time and place and sort of speak to his experience in such detail and eloquence is a credit to him as a person, and his willpower and his spirit to leave that awful situation and speak to it and try to help other slaves to become free and inform the world about this horrible atrocity. With all that in mind, I want to read a passage from the book that struck me. It stood out to me especially because of everything that I went through with my grandmother recently. The irony here is that I was looking for something different other than the end of life. And of course, this theme or subject of mortality, dying, death, afterlife, all that is absolutely central to, or it plays a big part in anything having to do with slavery and the experiences that slaves went through, particularly features prominently in narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. So here's the version I have. If you're reading along at home, It's page 61. Starts on page 61. If any one thing in my experience, more than another, served to deepen my conviction of the infernal character of slavery and to fill me with the unmutterable loathing of slaveholders, it was their base ingratitude to my poor old grandmother. She had served my old master faithfully from youth to old age. She had been the source of all his wealth. She had peopled his plantation with slaves. She had become a great-grandmother in his service. She had rocked him in infancy, attended him in childhood, served him through life, and at his death wiped from his icy brow the cold death sweat and closed his eyes forever. She was nevertheless left a slave for life, a slave in the hands of strangers, and in their hands she saw her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren divided like so many sheep, without being gratified with the small privilege of a single word as to their or her own destiny. And to cap the climax of their base ingratitude and fiendish barbarity, my grandmother, who is now very old, having outlived my old master and all his children, having seen the beginning and end of all of them, and her present owners finding that she was of but little value, her frame already racked with the pains of old age and complete helplessness fast stealing over her once active limbs, they took her out to the woods, built her a little hut, put up a little mud chimney, and then made her welcome to the privilege of supporting herself there in perfect loneliness, thus virtually turning her out to die. If my poor old grandmother now lives, she lives to suffer in utter loneliness. She lives to remember and mourn over the loss of children, the loss of grandchildren, and the loss of great-grandchildren. They are, in the language of the slave's poet Whittier, real quick, he's quoting a poet here named John, I believe John Greenleaf Whittier, who is a Quaker and an abolitionist. So the poem he's quoting here is, "Gone, gone, sold and gone, to the rice swamp dank and lone, where the slave whip ceaseless swings, where the noisome insect stings, where the fever demon strews poison with the falling dews, where the sickly sunbeams glare through the hot and misty air. Gone, gone, sold and gone, to the rice swamp dank and lone, from Virginia hills and waters, woe is me, my stolen daughters." And it goes back to Frederick Douglass's words. The hearth is desolate. The children, the unconscious children who once sang and danced in her presence are gone. She gropes her way in the darkness of age for a drink of water. Instead of the voices of her children, she hears by day the moans of the dove, and by night the screams of the hideous owl. All is gloom. The grave is at the door. And now, when weighed down by the pains and aches of old age, when the head inclines to the feet, when the beginning and ending of human existence meet, and helpless infancy and painful old age combine together, at this time, this most needful time, the time for the exercise of that tenderness and affection which children only can exercise towards a declining parent, my poor old grandmother, the devoted mother of 12 children, is left all alone in yonder little hut before a few dim embers. She stands, she sits, she staggers, she falls, she groans, she dies, and there are none of her children or grandchildren present to wipe from her wrinkled brow the cold sweat of death, or to place beneath the sod her fallen remains. Will not a righteous God visit for these things? that's a lot to process. Um, and it hits me because of, like I said, everything I went through with my grandmother and my parents and my aunt and my uncle and her aides and everyone who helped her out, being there for her, just the fact that we were able to be there for her, and all of these things that he speaks about how, it's these similarities between infancy and old age, and wiping the sweat from her brow, which I did, and wiped the, spittle from her mouth because her mouth was so dry from it being open, and her breathing through her mouth and moistening her lips at the end when she wasn't eating or drinking anymore. And the aides and all of us helping to rotate her so she wouldn't get bed sores, or at least try to mitigate her existing bed sores. I mean, all this care and attention and love that was directed at her. And, Frederick Douglass's grandmother being devoid of all of that, because of this terrible atrocity being perpetrated, both in terms of her race, her being a slave, and being old and quote unquote useless, and just being banished to the woods to die alone. I mean, it's just horrifying. So, it just makes me so thankful that things have changed so dramatically, and not that race relations in this country are by any means perfect. That's one aspect of it, obviously, but also that, I think we still have a ways to go with helping and treating our elderly with respect and being there for them. And not everyone can be in a position to help their dying relatives be at home and have great care. I know that's a financial consideration, but to the degree that we can, we should. And there's not only benefits to the people you're helping, but there's huge benefits to yourself, psychologically and spiritually. So that's it. Thank you for watching.